Welcome back to the Business Simple podcast. It's your host, James, and today I am doing another one of my Thoughts episodes. This one, I am going to go over the things that I've learned since starting a podcast. I'm doing this completely off the top of my head, so I'm optimistic that it will come across really well. There's a lot of stuff that comes to mind when I think about this. So I'm just going to riff through it, and I hope this is enjoyable for you to listen to or watch if you're checking us out on YouTube or you got the video up somewhere. So I would say the first thing that comes to my mind when I think about the things that I've learned since starting the podcast is I've been extremely lucky to have the caliber of guests that I have had on since the podcast has started. And I can only use the word lucky. I've put myself out there a little bit, and I've asked some pretty serious operators to come on board, and they've been very receptive of it. What I will say, and this is probably the part about this podcast journey that I'm going down that I enjoy the most, is that the similarities across high performers are so absurdly strong that it's hard to even comprehend. And I don't necessarily mean similarities in the way that they talk or anything like that, but I mean more in the energy that they sort of emit as you're talking to them. There's this confident but not cocky, sure of themselves but not over the top, and like open to contradictory opinions. And there's just this way that they have been when I've interviewed them. There's this certainty but not overwhelming. It's so hard to describe, but I feel that I've probably learned more about business since starting this podcast than I had in the entire time of running a company up until this point, just by being able to dig into the way that these people think, feel, act. And also, I've been able to, because I think about things the way that I do, I've been able to think about the way that they act and how they operate and reflect against the way that I act and how I operate, and probably spot some shortcomings in myself. I think that I probably have a little bit more imposter syndrome. I'm a little bit more, I doubt myself more than these guys do. There's that, it was one of my favorite moments of all of our podcasts all time where I asked Marty Fox if it ever felt like it was too much or if he was ever overwhelmed. And he just replied, "I'm built for this." That was, and like I gave goosebumps talking about it. I can still see him sitting opposite me saying it. And it was just one of those things where it made me realize that I am too built for what I do, and whatever comes my way, I'm the guy. I'm the one who's the best, I'm the person who solves the problem and who keeps the things moving and who does what's required. And because of that, there's nothing wrong with having that same confidence and that same feeling when you talk to people. Some other really interesting things that I've learned starting a podcast is that people really want to hear from you in a long format way. It surprises me because we're talking about that, or I was talking about that imposter syndrome thing just before. I don't think of myself as being someone who's worth tuning into and listening. I do this in the pursuit of what it could look like, big picture, long term, over the next few years, not what it looks like today. But there's something in a stranger walking up to you and saying, "Man, I've been listening to your podcast and I want you to know that I find it really valuable," that is quite unique. And I don't think it's possible to get that with many other forms of content. I also think, though, that it would be very easy to build a podcast and not create that with people. And I think that approaching a podcast from a real point of humility, genuinely wanting to learn and not using it as a way to kind of just talk about how great you are all the time is a very important part of that. So that's something that I've learned that's been really big. I've learned that the production value is everything. I think the reason why we get a lot of the guests that we get on is because of the level of effort that we put into the studio, the cameras, the microphones, the post-editing, all that kind of stuff has got us into some really cool places. And when we talk to these big guests about coming on board, they look at it and they go, "Wow, at least I'm going to be shown in a really good light." I've learned that podcast content is a really good foundation for a strong content strategy overall. I've learned that this episode that we shoot here will also double up as a slightly compressed YouTube video, and then it will also turn into 3 Instagram reels, maybe more. I mean, some of our guest episodes will be 15 different clips we'll pull out of them. That content is then good for my personal brand, but in some cases it's good for Digital Simples content. In some cases it's good for, so like it's actually a really, you think about it in its essence and you go, okay, so I'm going to sit down for an hour and I'm going to record 4 podcasts, and you go, God, what else could I do with an hour? I could finish that proposal, or I could approach some businesses, or I could get on top of my emails, or whatever it is. But this hour of recording content probably turns into 5 hours of content online. And then when you think about for that hour, the amount of time that people spend listening to you, i.e. you put an episode up and you get 650 listens on it, and that episode's an hour long, that's 650 hours of someone listening to you talk. And that would be very hard to do in any format outside of standing in front of an auditorium or a theatre with 650 people in it, and then just talking to people. I think that it's a really efficient way to produce content. I think that the little things go a long way, and I think that the endless pursuit of trying to be better at it. If you're watching this video, you'll notice that the lighting behind me is slightly different in this episode than it's been in the previous one-to-one episodes that we've done. You'll notice that the second camera angle is slightly different than the earlier episodes we did. You'll notice I don't have a drink bottle, and here I have it down on the floor. So one thing that me and Luke have done that I've really enjoyed about this podcast is we've just tried to get that touch better each time we've recorded. And the reason we've done that is really just to try to continuously improve the quality. A lot of stuff you wouldn't see, you may not notice. There's a pop filter on the microphones, which means I can get real close like this. You may not notice that our mixer has changed and gives us the ability to now live mix podcasts so we can balance the audio better, and also seems to hang on to the quality of the audio a little bit better as well. Luke's going to hate that I just use that terminology, but it makes it sound good. Something that has been really big about this is just that pursuit of getting better. And if you look at what our first one-to-one episodes look like, literally if you go to the Business Simple podcast and you scroll down to episode number 1 and you pull it up, it's a one-to-one episode of me, and you look at the production value, it was still pretty good. But you look at the microphone arm, you look at the pop filter, you look at the way that it was shot, you look at the lighting, you look at all of that sort of stuff. That takes 75 episodes to refine it like that, trying to make it better each time you record. And that has been a really fun thing to go through. And I think that it's paid off, in a big way when we look at some of the doors that it's opened for us. I had a meeting with a prospect today that's really big, and in the meeting he said the podcast opened the door because we could check whether we liked you as a person first. And that's something that you also just don't even think about. You don't think about the size of the company of the person who stops you in the street and says, hey man, I've been listening to your podcast and I've been really enjoying it. And the fact that that person may potentially turn into a client, and if they had a problem with their marketing, you'd be sure that you'd be one of the first people that they'd reach out to. So those are the things that I've learned from starting a podcast. If you're thinking about doing it, honestly, my advice to you would be go. It would be put aside some cash and spend as much on it as you can at the start, because you just won't look back on that and regret it in hindsight. And, I understand that a lot is probably different for a lot of different people, and we get really good use out of these 2 cameras for our client work. We use these lights for other things. We've had clients come in here and shoot podcasts. We can commercialize what we do here really well, but I would just say feeling really good about the content you're putting on the internet is going to help keep you addicted to uploading it. And, on a day like today where I've got a million other things that I could be doing, it's going to inspire me to come in here and sit down and, just coming in and having Luke say, oh, I've just done this different thing with the lighting. What do you think? Immediately, it just switched me over and put me in such a good headspace to record these episodes. So that's all I've got to say. If you can't though, also just get 2 Rode microphones and, plug them in somewhere and just go for it. And people still want to hear your content and just slowly improve. I would say wholeheartedly that it's extremely valuable. As soon as you can add video and it becomes valuable even further, because then you bring YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, all of that stuff into play as well. So anyway, that's my waffle on that. I hope you've enjoyed my thoughts around the things that I've learned starting a podcast. If you've enjoyed this, make sure you check us out on social media. We've got Business Simple Podcast, James Digital Simple, and the Digital Simple Instagram. Those are probably the three easiest ways to follow along. We've also launched another marketing podcast, which is Digital Simples Podcast, which is very marketing specific, as this Business Simple podcast starts to hit a little bit more down just being me and my guests. We're opening up space for me, my team, sometimes without me, to discuss marketing. So feel free to have a bit of a look at that too. And I will see you on the next one. Thanks for listening. Cheers.